Trapped below, the alternator escape on burn 1. Scott had been through plenty of bad situations, but this one might just top them all. All he'd wanted to do was loosen an engine mount to move a stubborn water hose. Instead, he was now wedged deep in the bilge of his Sea Ray Sundancer, belly compressed against the block, bald head slick with sweat and grease, and completely stuck. It had all gone wrong fast. His foot had slipped, his gut had dropped into the narrow gap between the engine and the fiberglass hull, and before he could stop himself, his shoulder had wedged under the alternator bracket. Scott grunted, trying to shift, but it was no use. His ribs pressed painfully against the side of the engine, making it hard to breathe. His right arm was trapped. His left was pinned behind him. And somewhere in the distance, drifting across the still afternoon air, he could hear his chickens clucking in their coop. Then, faint but unmistakable, came another sound. Chittering. Scott's stomach sank. The squirrels. From inside his barn, their usual haunt, he could hear them raising hell, scampering across rafters, knocking things over, making that awful squeaky laughter they did whenever he had a bad day. Scott exhaled sharply through his nose. I swear to God, the chittering got louder, like they somehow knew he was stuck and were enjoying every second of it. Scott clenched his jaw. He'd deal with them later. Right now, he had to get out of this mess. Wiggling his fingers, he searched for anything useful. His hand brushed against something cold, his ratchet. All right, think. What's in your way? The alternator. It was pressed against his shoulder, locking him in place. If he could get it loose. Gritting his teeth, he fumbled for the ratchet, fingers slipping on the greasy handle. After 2 failed attempts, he finally got a grip. His arm barely had room to move, but he managed to find the first bolt by feel alone. One turn, another. His fingers were cramping, but the bolt finally loosened. Now the second one. This one was tougher. He adjusted his angle, twisting his wrist awkwardly. The ratchet clicked, the bolt turned. The alternator dropped loose, sliding forward just enough for Scott to suck in his gut and twist. His ribs scraped against the mount as he wrenched himself backward. And then, pop! He was free. Scott scrambled out of the bilge, gasping as he flopped onto the deck. His heart was pounding, his shirt was ruined, and his bald head was streaked with grease. He lay there for a long moment, staring up at the sky, feeling the gentle sway of the boat beneath him. Then, in the distance, he heard the chickens again, clucking away in their coop like they didn't have a care in the world. And of course, the squirrels. They were still in the barn, still making that god-awful racket. One of them let out a particularly loud chatter, and Scott swore it almost sounded like a cheer. He sat up, pointing a greasy finger toward the barn. Go on, laugh it up now. Something clattered inside, followed by more scurrying and squeaking. Scott sighed, dragging a hand down his face. He was exhausted. He was filthy. But as he climbed off the boat, shaking his head at the mess he'd made, one final thought settled in his mind. I'm getting a bigger damn boat.